It wasn't just a car, it was the last piece of him that still made a sound, a heartbeat on four wheels wrapped in cherry red steel. My husband used to polish it every Sunday, humming low and steady like the engine itself. Before he passed, he placed the keys in my hand and whispered, "Don't ever sell her, she's part of me." And I didn't. For years I kept her covered, clean, and quiet, waiting for a day that mattered. But it wasn't me who uncovered her. My son did. Not to honor his father, but to fund fireworks, champagne, and a rented yacht. He sold a legacy for loud music and applause. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just made a call. And then I showed up at that birthday party. I waited for the toast. And when the room went still, I raised my glass and reminded them what pride used to look like. Before I go any further, thank you for listening to an old woman's truth. I know there are a million voices out there you could be hearing right now, but you're here with mine, and that means more than you think. Where are you watching from tonight? Is it a quiet kitchen? A warm bed? Maybe you've poured yourself something to sip while you listen. Whatever space you're in, I hope it feels safe. Sometimes the hardest stories aren't the loud ones. They're the ones we carry in silence, holding on to the memory of what we gave and the ache of what was taken. This story, it still lingers. Not because I haven't moved on, but because some wounds don't scab over. They just live quietly beneath the skin. So if you've ever trusted someone with something sacred, only to watch them trade it for applause or attention, I hope you stay with me. If you've ever sat in a room full of celebration and felt like the only one mourning something invisible, then you'll understand this. And if you're not ready to share your own story yet, that's all right. But if by the end you feel something stir inside you, just leave a note below. Tell me where you're watching from, or if this kind of silence ever found its way to your door. I'll be here, telling mine, one memory at a time. He wasn't a man of many words, my husband. But when he did speak, he meant every bit of it. He was the kind that didn't need to explain why something mattered. You just knew by how he touched it. Every Sunday, without fail, he'd take that old Chevelle out of the garage, roll up his sleeves, and get to work on her like she was something holy. That car wasn't just a machine to him. It was his church, his quiet, his way of staying close to the parts of life he never quite said out loud. I'd watch him from the window sometimes, rag in hand, moving slow over the hood like he was polishing a memory. Not a speck of dust left untouched. He'd hum a tune I never quite recognized, some low, steady rhythm that rose up from his chest like it had lived in there longer than any song on the radio. The neighbors used to laugh about it, said he loved that car more than most men love their homes. I never minded. I knew better. That car held pieces of him even I couldn't reach. It was the same car we rode in on our wedding night when we pulled off on a quiet road just to sit with the stars a while. The same one he taught our son to check the oil in, when he was barely tall enough to see over the hood. And it was the last thing he asked me to protect before he passed. He was lying in the hospice bed, the kind where everything beeps too loud and the blankets never feel warm enough. His breath was slower by then, his voice softer, but his hand still held mine like it had weight. He looked at me with that same steady look he always gave when something mattered and said, "Don't ever sell her, she's part of me." I kept that promise. For years I kept her parked in the garage, covered in a soft gray cloth, keys in the same drawer where he used to keep his watch. I never drove her. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to cheapen the silence he left behind. Every time I walked past that garage, I nodded at her like she could nod back. And I believed with all my heart that he would have been proud. I believed our son, his own flesh and blood, understood what that car meant. I thought he saw it too. The history, the heart, the hands that kept it running. I thought he'd protect it. I thought he'd protect me. But sometimes, what you build in love, someone else can take apart in seconds, just to feel important. And I didn't see that coming. Not from him. Not from my own. It was just a regular afternoon. The kind where the air feels still and the house doesn't ask much of you. I remember I was folding laundry in the kitchen, just watching the sunlight fall across the floor like it always did. I had no reason to feel anything different that day. No sign, no warning. But something pulled me toward the garage. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was him. Sometimes I'd open that door just to check, just to be near the shape of something that hadn't left me yet. I turned the knob, stepped down onto the concrete, and looked straight ahead. But she wasn't there. My eyes blinked hard, like maybe I'd missed it somehow. But the red wasn't there. The cover was gone too. All that stood in front of me was the imprint of where her tires used to rest, a soft outline in the dust that no wind had touched yet. And in that silence, I heard everything. It was loud, that kind of quiet. The kind that doesn't echo but just sinks straight into your chest and sits there. I walked toward the empty spot like I was sleepwalking, like maybe she'd appear if I looked long enough. I reached out toward the air, but there was nothing to touch, nothing to hold on to, just space where a promise used to live. I checked the drawer where I kept the keys. Empty. No note, no message, just absence. That's the part that stung the most. Not even a phone call, not even the courtesy of asking. He took it without a word, like it was his to take. My hand shook when I picked up the phone. I didn't even remember dialing, I just heard the ringing, and then his voice. Calm, like he was expecting me, but not bothered. Yeah, he said, and I could hear music in the background, people laughing. I sold the car. I needed the cash. It's my 30th, Mom. You don't even drive. That's what he said. Like that explained it, like that made it right. I didn't say a word at first, just stood there, staring into that garage, feeling the ache rise slow and steady like a tide. He kept talking, listing off what he spent the money on: champagne, fireworks, a yacht rental, a private DJ. It's going to be the party of the year, he said, laughing like I should be proud. I listened to his voice get smaller through the phone, like it was drifting far away even though he was right there, on the other end. And I thought about all the Sundays his father gave to that car. All the nights I peeked out window and saw him polishing the chrome like it was sacred. I thought about that hospital bed. That whisper. That promise. And then I hung up the phone. Not in anger. Not to punish him. Just because there was nothing left to say that he'd hear. The garage was still empty, but now so was something in me. He didn't even hesitate. No apology. No hesitation in his voice. Just said it like it meant nothing. It's just a car, Mom. I needed the money. You don't even drive anymore. That's what he told me, like I was a forgotten address on an envelope he no longer wanted to send, like I was standing in the way of his celebration. He said it like I had been holding on to something useless, like the car was just another old thing gathering dust instead of the living piece of memory it was. I stood there holding the phone, still facing the empty garage, trying to understand how someone could take something so sacred and break it down into dollar signs. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened as he kept going, not even pausing to see if I was still there. He told me all about the party he was planning. Champagne bottles by the case, a private DJ he found online, fireworks that would go off over the water like a movie scene, and a yacht. He said it like it was the crown jewel. Can you believe it? A yacht, Mom? For one night, I wanted to do it big. I wanted to ask him if he remembered his father ever throwing parties. If he remembered the man who stood on the porch at every birthday, grilling burgers with a dish towel slung over his shoulder and a quiet smile. I wanted to ask if the echo of those moments meant nothing now. But I didn't. Because I knew the answer. If he had remembered, that car would still be in the garage. He said I didn't even drive, as if that made it okay. As if driving was the only reason to keep something that mattered. I wanted to tell him it wasn't about the wheels or the road. It was about who built it, who cared for it, who kept it alive when life tried to wear it down. But I kept my mouth closed. I let the silence be louder than anything I could have said. He spent his father's soul on a one-night show. And he said it all with the ease of someone unwrapping a gift that wasn't meant for him, not realizing what he'd torn through to get to the center. I could hear the pride in his voice, the excitement. And in that moment, it was clearer than ever. He didn't just sell the car. He sold something he never really understood. He traded history for applause. He let go of something solid to chase lights that wouldn't last. And somehow, I was supposed to smile about it. I was supposed to say I was happy for him. But all I could do was stand in that garage, listening to the cold hum of nothing, while the weight of what he'd taken settled into the floor beneath my feet. The days that followed felt longer than they had any right to be. Not because of anything loud, not because of any shouting or arguments. No, it was the silence that stretched out like a road with no end. I stopped sleeping the way I used to. I'd lie down, close my eyes, but the quiet in that garage had followed me into the corners of my room. I kept hearing the sound that wasn't there. The missing hum of the Chevelle's engine, the jingle of the keys, the creak of the garage door rolling up every Sunday morning. All of it was gone, but it played in my head anyway, like memory had its own way of haunting you. I didn't cry, not right away. Grief isn't always tears. Sometimes it's just the way your hands stop doing what they're used to. How you reach for something before remembering it isn't there. I found myself standing in the kitchen with a dish in my hand, staring through the window at the driveway like I expected him to come around the bend with a bag of groceries and that same soft look in his eyes. But there was no one there. Just trees and sky and a silence that didn't care what day it was. Each morning I found myself walking toward the garage, even though I already knew what I'd see. Just an empty space where the car used to be, and the outline of her tires still pressed into the floor like a scar. I'd stand there with the door halfway open, letting the cold air wrap around my legs. And I'd just breathe. No music, no voice. Just me in the hollow where something sacred had been taken. I stopped setting the table for dinner. I stopped folding his flannel the way I used to. My hands slowed down. Everything did. It was like my home had exhaled too deeply and forgot how to breathe again. But one night, I was sitting in the living room with the lights off, and my eyes drifted to the old bookcase. Tucked behind a stack of magazines was a leather-bound address book. His. My husband's. The one with the cracked spine and notes in the margins. I hadn't touched it in years. Didn't need to. But something pulled me toward it that night. I walked over, picked it up with both hands, and sat down at the table. I opened the first page, and there it was, his handwriting. Steady, sharp, familiar. Names, phone numbers, little marks beside some of them that only he understood. And as I flipped through, my finger stopped on a name I remembered hearing once, years ago. A man he'd met at a car show. A collector. Someone who'd asked, half joking, if he ever wanted to sell the Chevelle. He never did. But I remember the way he told me about the conversation. Said the man respected the car, understood what it was. Not a toy. Not an accessory, a legacy. I stared at the number. No guarantee it was still good, no promise that it would lead anywhere. But in a week where everything I thought I could count on had shifted, that number suddenly felt like a thread. A small, fraying thread that maybe, just maybe, could be pulled toward something that still made sense. So I reached for the phone, and I dialed. The phone felt heavier than usual that night. I held it to my chest for a moment before I even started dialing, just breathing slow, wondering what I was doing. It had been years since my husband mentioned that man. Just once, in passing. Said he was some kind of collector, someone with a soft spot for old muscle cars and a sharper eye for the stories behind them. They met at a weekend show 2 towns over. Spent hours under the hood of the Chevelle, talking like the car could hear every word. My husband came home smiling that day, said it was rare to meet someone who truly respected the machine, not just the shine. I remember brushing it off at the time. But now, years later, I was hoping that memory had roots. The number rang 3 times. I almost hung up after the 4th. And then, a man's voice answered. Low, curious, like someone who hadn't expected his night to take a turn. I said my name softly, waited a beat, then said my husband's. There was a pause, not confused, just still. And then he said he had the red Chevelle. 71, I remember. And I nearly broke down right there. Just hearing someone else say it, remember it, like it wasn't just something I made up in my own mind. It brought a little warmth into the cold air that had settled around me all week. I told him what happened. Not everything, just enough. That the car had been taken without my say, that it was sold by someone who should have known better, that it wasn't about the metal, or the engine, or the paint. It was about what it meant, what it held, and what it was supposed to carry forward. He didn't interrupt. Not once. Just let me speak until I couldn't anymore. When I finished, he took a long breath. Then he said, it hasn't gone far. A dealer in the next city picked it up, probably just looking to flip it for the weekend crowd. He asked me to give him a day. Said he'd make a few calls, pull a few strings, and see what he could do. And something about the way he said it made me believe him. Not in a loud, promising kind of way, but in the way quiet men speak when they mean what they say. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't throw numbers at me. He just said, "That car meant something to your husband. You can hear it in the way you talk about it. I'll find it." I hung up with my hand still resting on the table, staring down at the address book like it was a bridge back to something I'd thought was lost. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel quite so hollow. I still had no idea what I would do if the car came back. No idea how to make peace with the person who sold it like it was just another thing on a shelf. But I knew I couldn't let that be the ending. Not for the Chevelle. Not for him. There are still good men in this world. Even if I had to call 3 cities over to find one. And that night, I went to bed without pacing. I didn't sleep, not all the way, but I didn't stare at the ceiling either. I just laid there with the phone beside me and the faintest hope, sitting steady in my chest, that something sacred might still find its way home. It came 2 days later. Not a phone call, not a knock on the door, just a message that blinked onto my screen like it didn't know the weight of what it was interrupting. A group text filled with balloons, exclamation points, and too many names I didn't recognize. Big 30 this Saturday, yacht party, bring good vibes. That was it. No "Hey Mom," no message just for me, just noise dressed up as celebration. I stared at it for a long time. Read it once, then again, as if maybe I missed something. As if tucked between those words, there'd be a sign that I still mattered. But there wasn't. It was just a broadcast. Loud and hollow, like a flyer taped to a wall that no one looks at twice. I wasn't invited like a mother. I was lumped in like a name on a list, an obligation in the blast of a text meant to feel important. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't move it. There was nothing to say. No part of me wanted to ask where the kindness went, or why the person I raised had stopped looking me in the eye. I just sat there, the screen glowing, casting its light over the quiet room around me, and I let the message sit. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I just let it exist, the way dust settles on a table you no longer use. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea I didn't want, and stared out the window. The wind had picked up that evening. It moved the trees gently, the way his voice used to move through this house. Firm, but soft. I wondered what he would have said if he were still here. Probably nothing. Probably just would have looked at me, raised an eyebrow, and handed me the keys. That was his way. He didn't use many words, but he always made his meaning known. I reached for the drawer where the invitation used to live. The one that mattered. The kind you held in your hands, paper and ink, chosen with care. I still had old ones tucked away, birthdays he never remembered sending, but I never threw out. I never thought I'd miss the sound of a mailbox so much. Later that night, I sat with the phone again, looked at the message, thought about what it meant. Not the party, not the noise, but the act of sending it that way. He didn't want me there because he wanted me. He wanted to be seen, including me. He wanted the appearance of family, not the presence. And that was something I couldn't give him. Not like that. So I RSVP'd with silence. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no, I just let the space between us speak for me. Because sometimes the absence of a reply is the only way to be heard. And I needed him to feel that silence more than he'd ever felt my words. The night of the party arrived with a kind of heat that didn't come from the weather. It was the kind that settles in your chest when you know you're walking into a place that forgot who you were. I got dressed without hurry, without makeup, without decoration. Just me, the way I've always been. I didn't wear sadness on my face, and I didn't carry anger in my bag. What I carried couldn't be seen. What I carried was memory and grief and the steady, silent weight of a promise I hadn't broken, even when he had. The street leading to the dock was lit up like a concert. Strings of lights stretched overhead like they were trying to turn the night into something magical, something grand. I heard the music before I even saw the boat, something loud and fast and full of bass that thumped in my chest like a warning. People spilled out of cars, laughing, posing, throwing their arms around each other for pictures they'd forget in a week. It was celebration for the sake of noise, not meaning. The yacht was anchored like a stage, pulsing with music, rimmed with people dressed too brightly for their own reflections. My son stood at the center of it all, grinning wide, drink in hand, posing like he'd built the whole thing with his bare hands. People clapped when he spoke. They called his name like he was someone to cheer for. And I stood just outside the circle, unseen, letting it all wash over me. Not one of them noticed me right away. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashing anything. I just stood still and let the wind brush past my shoulders as I waited. The stars above didn't blink. They just held their silence. I kept mine too. Until the sound came. It was low at first, a slow, steady rumble. Not the kind of engine that screams for attention, but the kind that makes the ground remember who used to walk there. It rolled in from the road behind me, smooth and sharp and unmistakable. The Chevelle. Her engine humming like a secret that had waited long enough. That red paint still shined under the dock lights, and the chrome kissed the moon like it had missed her. The crowd didn't recognize it at first. Just another noise in the middle of their shouting. But I turned, and there it was, coming to a stop just behind the circle of celebration. The collector stepped out, calm and quiet, holding the keys like they weighed more than gold. He didn't need to say a word. He just looked at me, nodded once, and held them out. I took them without breaking my gaze, and for the first time in weeks, my hands didn't shake. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. That moment said more than any invitation ever could. I wasn't there to reclaim attention. I wasn't there to ask for a seat. I was there to take back something he had no right to give away. As I stepped forward, keys in my hand, the music began to lower, bit by bit. Not because someone turned it down, but because people started to notice. One by one, faces turned. Laughter softened. Clapping stopped. My son turned around slowly, drink still in his hand, the smile on his face beginning to slip. He saw the car before he saw me. And when his eyes finally met mine, there was no welcome in them, just confusion, just the slow, crawling realization that something was about to shift. And not in his favor. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, steady and full, holding the keys to the very thing he thought he had buried under bright lights and borrowed joy. And the silence that wrapped around us then was louder than anything that had come before. He was in the middle of laughing when it happened, standing near the edge of the yacht's upper deck, holding a tall glass filled with something golden and bubbling, lifted halfway in the air like it was a trophy. People were gathered around him in a loose circle, swaying from the music, clapping along, already tipsy on the glow of the evening. Someone shouted for a speech. Another held up their phone, recording like they were capturing a king at his own coronation. And he smiled the way only someone does when they believe the moment belongs to them, when they think the whole room is theirs to command. I watched him tilt his glass a little higher. I could hear the way he cleared his throat, like he'd practiced what he was going to say. That same confidence he'd always worn like armor was shining from his face, polished and proud. I stepped forward then. Not fast, not loud. Just one step at a time. No spotlight followed me. No heads turned immediately. But I moved through the crowd like the wind, soft and steady, parting the sea of strangers who had no idea what was about to unfold. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't climb onto anything or raise my arms. I didn't need to. I just reached for a clean glass that had been left on a nearby table. It was half full of water, forgotten, ordinary, but it would do. I held it gently, as if it carried more than just liquid. I waited until his words began to leave his lips, something about being grateful, about turning 30, about chasing dreams and living big. And then I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, firm, not demanding attention, just claiming it without apology. To those who sell legacies, I said, letting each word breathe, letting it land, and to those who keep them alive. The music cut out like someone had pulled the cord. The laughter stalled in midair. People turned, heads swiveled, and for a moment, no one moved. My son's arm froze in place, his glass still lifted, and his mouth slightly open like the words had been pulled straight out of it. His eyes found mine, and in that instant I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, not embarrassment. It was recognition. The kind you don't want to come, but once it does, you can't unsee it. He looked from me to the keys in my hand, then to the car parked at the edge of the dock, glowing under the lights like it had never left, and his hand began to lower, slow and shaky. The glass tilted, slipped, fell from his fingers before he could catch it. It didn't shatter, just landed hard and rolled once before coming to a stop by someone's shoe. No one picked it up. I didn't blink, I didn't explain, I didn't name names or give a speech. That one sentence was enough. The truth was already laid bare. And the people who mattered didn't need a history lesson to understand the weight of it. Some of them looked at me with quiet respect. Some turned away, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. But every single one of them heard it. Every single one of them saw what he had traded away for one night of applause. And I didn't need anything else from that party. I had already taken back what was mine. Not just the car, but the silence he had tried to bury me under. I broke it without shouting. I reminded him who raised him. And I did it without ever raising my voice. I didn't wait for him to say a word. I didn't wait for questions or for whispers or for someone to come up and ask if I was all right. Because I was. For the first time in a long while, I was more than all right. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone standing there in glitter and noise, sipping from glasses and watching a story they didn't help write. I had done what I came to do, and that was enough. So I turned, slowly, without rush, without regret. I walked back across that dock like it belonged to me. The crowd didn't part, not because they didn't respect me, but because they didn't know what to say. And that silence, that stillness, was louder than the fireworks he had planned for later. It was the kind of quiet that settles into a person and doesn't leave. When I reached the Chevelle, I paused for a moment and placed my hand on the roof. The metal was warm from the night air, familiar, steady. I opened the driver's door, slid into the seat, and just sat there. I hadn't driven in years. My license hadn't expired, but my reasons had. After he passed, I had stopped needing to go places just for the sake of going. The world felt smaller, my movements became quieter. But the moment I wrapped my fingers around that wheel, something old and strong returned, like a muscle that had been sleeping and finally woke up. The leather still held its shape, molded from years of his hands before mine. The dashboard smelled faintly of him. Engine oil, aftershave, and the quiet kind of care that only men like him knew how to give. I looked ahead, took one breath, turned the key and listened. That engine roared to life like she'd been waiting for me, not just to come back, but to remember how it felt to hold on. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the dock. Slow at first, smooth. The tires rolled over the old wood like a goodbye that didn't need to be spoken. The party behind me grew smaller in the rearview mirror, lights fading into nothing, music replaced by the steady hum of something real beneath me. I didn't glance back, not even once. The road home was darker than I remembered, but peaceful. The kind of dark that feels honest, not heavy. Trees lined the edges like quiet witnesses. The wind moved gently against the car windows, and the engine purred like it knew every turn before I did. There were no streetlights where I lived. Just memory guiding me back. I passed the corner store, where we used to buy cold sodas on summer nights. Drove past the field where he once taught our boy how to ride a bike. Running behind him, steadying the wheels. Every piece of pavement under those tires knew us. Every mile stitched something back together. And in that moment, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson. I was simply reclaiming something that should never have been lost. Not for what it was made of, but for what it had carried, for the weight it held. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to get home. And when I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, I sat there for a while, my hands resting on the wheel, my heart steady again. I drove home with everything. The car, the memory, the promise kept. I drove home with my pride in the passenger seat, and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't ache. It sang. He didn't call. Not that night, not the day after, not even the week that followed. The phone stayed still, resting on the kitchen counter like it knew better than to expect anything. And maybe that was the part that surprised me least. Not the silence, but how familiar it felt. I had known it long before the party, long before the car. It had been living between us for years, wearing different faces, a shrug, a short reply, a forgotten birthday, and now, this. The full weight of silence finally owning its name. Word got around quicker than I thought. Not from him, of course. He's never been one to tell a story when he's not the hero in it. But neighbors talk, especially the ones who still care enough to knock softly on your door and act like they were just passing by. One of them, a woman I've known for nearly 20 years, leaned in just enough and whispered, "I heard it went quiet when you spoke." Not like a pause, more like the air got pulled out of the room. I didn't say much back, just nodded, offered her a biscuit I had no intention of eating, and let the moment pass. Because there wasn't anything left to explain. What happened on that dock didn't need retelling. It lived in the way people looked at me now, with a little more weight in their eyes, a little more care in their voice. Like they'd seen something they didn't expect from someone they thought they already understood. A friend from across town sent me a message late that night, just a short line. "I've never seen a room go so quiet." I read it twice, not because it shocked me, but because something about it settled in my chest like a last stone on a pile that finally felt complete. I smiled when I read it, but not with joy. Not with pride, just with the kind of stillness that comes when you've spoken your truth and don't need to repeat it. Later that week, I opened the garage. The light flickered once before it came on fully, casting that soft yellow glow across the floor. I pulled the Chevelle in slow, careful, the tires rolling back over the same lines where they had once rested for years. The dust that had formed in her absence had already begun to scatter, as if even the air had waited for her return. I stepped out, closed the door gently, and walked around her like he used to. My fingers brushed over the hood. The paint was still warm. The engine had settled into a quiet hum, that low, proud silence only a well-built machine can hold. I went to the shelf where the cover had been folded for years, unfolded it slowly, and draped it back over the car with both hands, smoothing out the wrinkles like a mother pulling a blanket over a sleeping child. And when I was done, I stood there for a while, just breathing in the space, not filling it with thoughts or words, just letting it be. Because something had been returned to me. Not just the car, but the part of myself that still remembered how to protect what mattered. I turned off the light, pulled the garage door shut, and let the latch click into place. Then I walked back into the house, locked the front door behind me, made a cup of tea I knew I'd finish this time, and sat by the window as the evening pressed in. The noise had died down, the party was over, and I, for once, didn't feel like I had been left behind. I felt like I had finally arrived where I was supposed to be, quiet, steady, whole. I didn't lose a son that night. I just saw who he really was, without the noise, without the lights, without the stage he built for himself. Sometimes people don't break your heart, they just show you where the cracks have always been. And when they do, it's not your job to glue them back together. It's your job to protect the parts of yourself that still remember how whole love is supposed to feel. I don't hate him, I don't wish him harm, but I no longer wait at the window for a version of him that never learned how to carry the weight of where he came from. If you've ever held something sacred and watched someone trade it for attention, I hope you remember this. You're not crazy. You're not bitter. You just remember better. And if this story found a quiet place in you, tell me below. Have you ever watched someone sell your memory for their moment? Or just write, "It wasn't just a car. I'll understand." If you've ever walked away without shouting, without begging, without needing anyone to see what you carried out with you, I hope you'll subscribe. I tell stories for hearts like yours. And if you're watching this alone tonight, just know, I'm right here. Thank you for watching.